Okay, yeah, let's just get started. I'm sure people will settle in. So we have a pretty exciting panel today, which is all about scaling Bitcoin. I'll just start with some introductions first. My name is Sarah. I lead BD and marketing at Gamma.io, the premier creator tool platform and marketplace for ordinal inscriptions on Bitcoin. And with me today are three incredible builders, networkers, just people in the Bitcoin space. So yeah, why don't you guys introduce yourself? Jeremy, you can start.
Hi, my name is Jeremy Rubin. I am a Bitcoin Core contributor on sabbatical. I previously worked on adding smart contracts to Bitcoin through covenants. I have the proposal BIP 119 check template verify, which is kind of in my retirement, seeing quite a lot of excitement right now. And long time friend of Casey and follower of the development of Ordinals, and so excited to share some thoughts on scalability with you all today.
Hi, my name is Rena Shah. I'm with Trust Machines. We build Bitcoin products like the Leather Wallet, the console chat platform, and soon to be a DeFi on Bitcoin app coming soon. I've been in the Bitcoin space for a while, so most of you probably know me from when I was at Finance US. However, I got started in Bitcoin almost 10 years ago. I used to work in oil, and then I started mining Bitcoin.
All right, thanks. Hey, everybody. I'm Arik. I'm a software engineer at Spiral, where I work on LDK. I work on Taproot support for Rust Lightning and more recently Trampoline. Prior to that, I was a software engineer at BitGo, where I was building their wallet. And then I had a 1-year brief bout of shitcoinery working at Facebook's Libra.
Is that a Bitcoin scaling solution?
No.
Cool. Why don't we get into some of the Bitcoin scaling solutions that some of you in the audience might know about? Namely, let's start with Lightning. As you work on Lightning, Arik, at Spiral, what is it? What are the perks of it? And how does Lightning scale Bitcoin?
Lightning is a protocol which allows users of Bitcoin to interact and to transfer money with one another without having to resort on-chain. So the only on-chain footprint that you have is the channel open transaction. And once that confirms, you can exchange funds back and forth, move them as many times as you like, even move them across multiple hops to other Lightning recipients that you do not have direct open channels with, and the chain gets none the wiser. If at some point eventually you do want to then persist your final balance on chain, then you close out the channel after all of those intermediate transactions have completed. It allows you to transact without paying ridiculous on-chain fees. And it also allows you to not have to wait for block confirmations. It's significantly faster. It's pretty much instantaneous. And it's been commonly accepted to be the future of Bitcoin for the last half decade, I think.
I think that was a solid introduction to Lightning, and essentially, in colloquial terms, Lightning scales Bitcoin by not forcing you to make an on-chain transaction every single time you want to send or receive Bitcoin. Instead, you just make an on-chain transaction when you open or close a channel, and then the rest of your transactions are instantaneous and extremely low fees. So, is that right?
Yeah, one of the benefits of Lightning is that everybody else who wants to use Bitcoin for on-chain transactions also benefits from Lightning usage, because Lightning transactions, with them not happening on-chain and not having an on-chain footprint besides the channel open transaction, obviously free up the on-chain space for other transactions, such as new Lightning channel open transactions.
So I want to talk about maybe why we haven't seen Lightning applied or talked about in the Ordinals ecosystem so far. And maybe Rena or Jeremy, you have some thoughts on this as well.
I think on the ordinal side, it's a little bit hard. Like maybe you can send an ordinal via Lightning. I don't know.
Yeah, so my tenuous understanding of the Ordinals protocol is such that it is not possible currently to transmit Ordinals via Lightning because it would only work peer-to-peer. It will only work with your direct channel partner because everything is about the UTXO model. So if you were to transact funds via Lightning across multiple hops, then all of a sudden you'd be talking about completely unrelated Satoshis or Ordinals. So unless there were some sort of wormhole function or some teleportation mechanism, which I guess the Ordinals protocol, if they don't have, could build, I don't really see a way to easily transact Ordinals across multiple hops in Lightning. It would need to have a completely different protocol where instead of the way that Lightning channels are built today, it would need to be something like trading PSBTs. It's honestly, I don't think something that anybody has really thought about deeply so far.
I mean, you're making it sound like Lightning sounds broken if you can't do like certain like more robust functions, because like the way you're describing Lightning is like I can use it to pay for something and do that transaction, but if you want something more robust and scalable for other Bitcoin functionality, it may not serve the purpose.
Well, the ordinal functionality has not it has not existed until just less than a year ago. So the question is, what do you define as robust Bitcoin functionality? And I think at this point, you kind of enter a space where the definition might be subjective. Like, is transacting Satoshis as they are defined by the Ordinals protocol, which one could argue is pretty arbitrary, is that something that is necessarily making transactions robust? Open question.
I think generally for any sort of layer 2 in Bitcoin, it requires advanced knowledge of what things are going to be operating on it. And so Lightning was designed in particular for dealing with like plain Bitcoin. And when you go to Ordinals, it's not quite going to work. This is in a similar sense to if you said, well, Uniswap is broken on Ethereum because it doesn't deal with NFTs. It's like, okay, well, it was designed for a different standard. It works with that standard. And if you want to do something else, you need, a new standard or a way of wrapping things. So I think it'll be similar in Bitcoin for any layer 2 type solution, but it does mean that there's an exciting space for more scalable trading of ordinals that, one of you could develop a solution for.
So it seems clear that even though we're developing all these exciting scaling solutions for Bitcoin, that doesn't mean that they robustly apply to every sort of principle that comes up in Bitcoin, such as the Ordinals ecosystem. So, or DeFi for that matter. And so we have to explore other sort of scaling solutions in layer 2s and side chains and whatnot. Maybe Rena, you can touch on one of the L2s or side chains that Trust Machines works on in the ecosystem.
We're exploring a lot of different L2s to build a robust DeFi protocol. We tried Lightning. It's not Lightning doesn't do DeFi. We would love it to at one point, but we're not quite there. We are exploring BitVM. It's a little bit too early for us. Right now we're building with stacks. It's a solution. I'm not saying it's the best solution, but it gives us some EVM-like function with Bitcoin finality post hard fork. We like stacks because there is at least an ability to have final settlement on Bitcoin, but it's still limited by 10-minute block times. I want to explore more. We are looking at RSK and Liquid as alternate paths, but I think you come down to like your Bitcoin standard trilemma of can you build it fast? Can you build it secure? Will it scale? And like all of them have their drawdowns and such, but we're trying them all and trying to see what sticks.
So you touched on exploring BitVM just a little bit. but it is pretty early. I know, Jeremy, you mentioned exploring BitVM at some point. Do you want to go into what exactly that is?
Yeah, sure. So for the uninitiated, BitVM is a way of doing arbitrary computation on Bitcoin. So sort of equivalent in a sense to what you could do on Ethereum. The way that it works is that you take any computation that you wanted to run. So let's say a trade of an ordinal for another ordinal and maybe some consideration, a little bit of Bitcoin on the side. And you would express it as a series of steps. And each step would be something very, very, very simple on the order of assuming that we were starting in this state with, let's say the funds half transferred, and we are ending in the state with them 1/4 transferred. If we applied from the state that we're in with a half transfer, a function, then we would end up in the state with 1/4 transferred. And then we have another state transition somewhere else that says starting with a 1/4 transferred, then, 75%, not 1/4, 75% transferred, and then going to 100% transferred. If we apply the function again, then we go to 100% transferred. And you express this computation in a sequence of maybe let's say millions of steps of each individual thing that has to happen, and the initial state and the end state along each part of that journey. And then you are able to say if any part of that computation went wrong, you have the simplest possible part of it that was done in a corrupt manner. You can point that out on chain. You can post a proof that was done incorrectly, and then challenge it and then pull the money out in response. So the way that BitVM works is there's a trusted party that is running the computation. And if that trusted party cheats or refuses to publish the result of the computation, then the people who are depending on that can publish a proof and pull the money away from them. So that's what BitVM does. And for Ordinals, it would enable a lot of things like loading in, let's say, thousands of Ordinals from all different users, and then accepting offers that are signed by people and validating the signed offers, transferring them, and so sort of pooling them all together and then unpooling them with whatever complicated logic you want in between. So BitVM represents a new way of doing that, and really the contrast to understand compared to what else is out there, because there are other things that are more like layer twos, is that BitVM is really going with direct on-chain resolution, so that even if you did have a layer two, maybe at some point in the future that you wanted to operate on, BitVM expands the threshold of what you're able to do directly on-chain, which is a really big deal for something like Ordinals, which is an on-chain first protocol.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the sort of problems that we need to account for when we're thinking about layer two or just scaling solutions for Bitcoin. So for people who are in the Ordinals ecosystem who have transacted with Ordinals, you might be familiar with, the fee issues and the mempool being clogged and really slow block times. What are some other things that people or developers run into when it comes to scaling Bitcoin?
With Lightning specifically, if I may touch on that, one of the issues that a lot of developers are facing is how to build secure non-custodial Lightning applications. Because really the trickiest part about Lightning, and let me juxtapose it with the user experience and the user story of receiving money on Bitcoin. On Bitcoin, you publish an address, and then if people want to pay money, they send Bitcoin to that address, and you can be gone on a deserted island for a couple of years, and then the cruise ship finds you, you come back, and you have a ton of Bitcoin in your address. With Lightning, that doesn't work. With Lightning, you need to sign off on a channel state transition in order to be able to receive money, which fundamentally means that you need to come online prior to the HTLC expiration time. I hope I'm not getting too technical here, but basically what it means is that you have a timer that starts ticking as soon as somebody starts sending you money. So for you to be able to receive Lightning non-custodially, you either have to be always online, or you have to start gnawing at the non-custodial paradigm and maybe have something like a Lightning service provider that does things like async payments, where, well, it's a protocol that can dig deeper into, but the point being is that it's much, much harder. And that presents a real UX challenge and a real design challenge to users and developers alike.
Rena, what do you see in the ecosystem in terms of things needed for scaling solutions?
Smart contracts for Bitcoin, just to start, like our base layer was purposely built simple. You can transact, you can send money, and that's it. I don't think we're in a place that you can do as many robust things on top of it. Ordinals is kind of the first theory of what you can do on top, but I want to see a world where I can use my Bitcoin directly in DeFi, and the only way I could maybe see this possible is using DLCs to an extent of like maybe use that as collateral, but I don't think we have the ability to build apps on Bitcoin without fundamental change.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think something that people should keep in mind is the category of like functionality layer twos is not a real thing. Any functionality that you want to have has to exist at the lowest layer. For example, with Lightning as a layer two, payments exist on Bitcoin, and so you can make a layer two of payments, and it's a more efficient way of doing payments. But if payments didn't exist on Bitcoin, you really couldn't have a layer two payment solution. It would not really make sense. So if you have a smart contract solution and you have that in a layer two, not having smart contracts on layer one, those layer two smart contracts don't actually really have any way of existing, on the base layer. So I think that that's definitely a true statement.
Maybe we should be building our own layer two that like fixes all of our unique challenges.
How much do you think this is a detriment or a positive for Bitcoin? And I suppose talking about scaling Bitcoin, not in terms of functionally scaling Bitcoin, but user-wise, scaling Bitcoin to billions of people. For instance, hypothetically, how does the lack of composable smart contract functionality on the layer one, or just the limitations of Bitcoin itself when it comes to block times and fees and whatnot, sort of act as a plus or a minus in your eyes when it comes to Bitcoin's future for scaling up?
I think it's a really big question because you're essentially asking about a bunch of different components, right? Like functionality, block time, fees, all of that. So I think without loss of generality, I want to just address the functionality aspect. And I think the fact that Bitcoin's functionality is fairly limited is probably its biggest asset. It's a very Bitcoin maximalist thing to say, which of course I am one, that the less functionality you have in the base layer, if you limit it to things like just payments as opposed to smart contracts, particularly not having smart contracts, I think is a huge benefit because it makes the first layer predictable. And if you are scaling to billions of people, you want to have predictability such that you don't have weird security issues that arise once you have hundreds of millions of people already onboarded. So as long as the base layer is kept to the minimum possible functionality, you can then scale on the second layer, as Jeremy pointed out, and you can be fairly certain that no matter how long the second layer is around without having to resort to the first layer as a sort of settlement layer, the second layer will continue working in that the first layer will still work in the same way that the second layer expects it to work. So the settlement transactions will remain valid throughout. And that is something where not having to worry about smart contracts where bugs could be discovered way too late, such as with the Ethereum DAO hack. I think that is a huge benefit that Bitcoin has. And sometimes less is more. And this is definitely one such scenario.
I like Bitcoin because it's simple. It's meant for high value settlement. But we're now entering this era of people don't just want to hold Bitcoin. They want to do more. The Puritans are going away respectfully, and people now want to tinker with Bitcoin and create different things, ordinals, art, DeFi, whatever it may be. And we need to give them the room to like change Bitcoin's perception from rock to productive asset. And you want the productive asset to be settling on the base layer for security, but the innovation needs to occur somewhere else.
I think irrespective of if you want to support other applications, there just isn't sufficient contracting to even support scaling Bitcoin as a like purely payments. And then anytime that you add enough functionality to actually, approach scaling the layer one, payments functionality, you're inevitably going to enable other things. It's just like fundamental to the generality of computation. So I think it's sort of an unwinnable position, sort of in maybe Bitcoin, maximalist culture, that you'll be able to prevent smart contracts from existing while achieving the goals of Bitcoin. So I think if, and it's not just across scalability, it's also privacy and decentralization. These are all things that are going to end up being important for Bitcoin to succeed long term.
Let's talk about some of alluding to Bitcoin's most controversial history in terms of people recognizing that Bitcoin has, some scaling problems, and then trying to scale Bitcoin on chain, Bitcoin itself. Jeremy, I'm sure you have a lot of experience through that sort of time period. Arik as well, if you guys want to speak on it. Technically,
I think there aren't really that many technical challenges at this point to at least like scaling through contracts. I think a lot of it is just like social challenge of not knowing what the community actually wants Bitcoin to evolve like. And I think at this point we have enough like technical documentation, literature, and options that if the community had a more coherent direction on what it wanted, we'd be able to adopt things that would not only advance like other layer 2 designs, but enhance Lightning as well. But the rate of those being sort of disseminated and understood by the Bitcoin community is substantially slower than the rate that the community is growing. So progress on those things is basically non-existent. And without a change in that, it's unlikely that Bitcoin will bring in new technology.
Do you feel that working on Lightning, that everything just is being held back by sort of new innovation on the base layer?
Yeah, to some extent. One of the biggest innovations that I've been looking forward to and that I've been advocating for a while is LN symmetry, which would rely on either SIG-hash any prev out, which basically allows you to spend from any public key regardless of the UTXO that public key was that the money was sent to. So it essentially just means that you're not committing to the concrete UTXO in your transaction input, or SIG-hash or check template verify, which obviously Jeremy is particularly familiar with. That is one thing. The other thing is we've been looking forward, and we've been talking for years now about improvements such as signature aggregation, which look, we have gotten Schnorr a couple years ago, and Schnorr is kind of the first step. With Schnorr, signature aggregation is going to be much simpler than it would have been with ECDSA. But regardless of whether you perceive Bitcoin's ossification as a benefit or as a drawback, it is certainly there, which means that there's a certain rate limit to the speed at which new Bitcoin functionality is going to get deployed. And that obviously means that if you have some functionality that relies on those changes to the first layer, you're not going to be able to roll that out until the first layer meets those requirements.
And I think another thing that people maybe who aren't directly like software engineers kind of miss out is that there is a very, very high cost of switching for these things. So even now that Taproot is available, or even maybe if SIG-hash any prev out becomes available, a lot of Lightning organizations have said that they're very unlikely to want to switch to it because they've built out a lot of infrastructure and understanding on, all the nitty gritty details on, LN Justice, as it's called, which is, the version before any prev out. So that they may not even want to switch at that point if they have 5 years of, production use on something they know that works.
Yeah, and here's the thing about Lightning as it is today. Ellen Justice, or the standard Lightning channel layout that we're familiar with, it's asymmetrical. So if Alice and Bob have a channel, they each have a different version, a mirror image of one another's commitment transactions, uh, just to be able to allow that penalty. And that means that if you're a Lightning developer and you want to consider all possible edge cases, you have to think about what your own commitment transaction looks like, what your view of your counterparty's commitment transaction is, and what your counterparty's view of your commitment transaction is. So building new features becomes really complicated because you have to think through all of those different combinations and all of those different scenarios. And as you add more features, in Lightning there are feature flags, and there are a bunch of different combinations where you have static remote keys, maybe trampoline routing, maybe it's just such a huge set of possible combinations of what features one node exposes and what features another node exposes. And then there are features and nodes, features and channels. It goes really deep. So that if you want to transition that to a completely different base layer assumption where suddenly the commitment transactions are symmetrical, it's a ton of work. And so there is a certain opportunity cost where at some point you would even wonder, does it make sense to figure out a way to transition from Ln justice to Ln symmetry, or L2, or should we just start from scratch? Or alternatively, does it even make sense to get started working on L2? And the thing is, Lightning is really complicated, but to drive my point home, I want to mention that Taproot as an address format has been available for a couple of years now. And to this day, it is Coinbase doesn't allow not just to receive money on a Taproot address, which of course is slightly more difficult than actually sending money to a Taproot address. They don't allow sending, and all that sending is supporting a different output script. So that is just purely shocking. And I think huge kudos to the Ordinals community, because Ordinals have made Taproot addresses so popular that I think they're going to take all of the traditional Bitcoin providers by storm and make all the wallets and exchanges support sending to Taproot addresses much sooner than would have been the case otherwise. But if they're so sluggish about making that transition, which is so trivial, I do wonder how long it's going to take once we even have the base layer changes in place to actually do this really complicated transition that is going to be necessary for Lightning.
Sounds tough, and sounds like there are a lot of moving parts and parts of Bitcoin, like tech culture and also community culture and ordinals and exchanges and layer twos and sidechains and all these different components that are working together to try and help scale Bitcoin in all these different ways to serve all these different functions. And clearly, I guess this is all to say we are very early still. And so, yeah, we're just about done with our panel. And
so we're early, but it's late.
yeah. Thank you all for giving very insightful just talks into sort of your background in the scaling Bitcoin space. And I would love to know, just for closing thoughts, your overall thoughts on the ecosystem specifically in Ordinals, but also as Bitcoin grows and Bitcoin scales, what can we look forward to?
I think I'll just say, maybe for some words of wisdom for the community, is that it's so early in the story of Ordinals. Like, break as much stuff as you can right now, because it may seem difficult right now, but it'll be 10 times more difficult next year, and it'll be 10 times more difficult the year after that. So knock everything out that you think are sort of like the big changes or architecture shifts that are needed. Obviously don't destroy people's, favorite inscription number or whatever, but I think fixing all the things now and like making the big changes will be easier now than it ever will be. And even not just big changes, but migrations to better things or, new ways of doing things, that will all be easier to do now than it will be later.
I guess mine is we're so early that I'm still so bullish on Ordinals. There are so many different areas that you can build an inscription or I guess an NFT, but all I come back to is, do I want my NFT to be the highest value settlement? Do I want it to feel like luxury? And when you think of that, all it could be is an ordinal. So if you want to create something that you perceive is special, it should always be an ordinal.
I'm not good at making predictions, but I will say this. Over a year ago, nobody except Casey could have possibly predicted ordinals, and the change that it has brought up on Bitcoin has been absolutely massive. So I think what we should do is just have fun being surprised going forward. There is no telling what's going to happen a year from now, much less 5 or 10 years. So whatever I say would be wrong anyway. Let's just go with the flow and hopefully see some really exciting changes.
Cool. Thank you guys so much.